So good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. Great to be here. I stepped in to do this gig last night, so I'm delighted because I'm relaxed because I didn't have time to prepare, so that's even better. But also delighted to help facilitate such a great panel. I know each individual as individuals, but also what they represent in the industry. And we have with us four experts who are here to champion and support and are passionate about payments. And Steve, thank you very much for that introduction, because you gave us a lovely landscape view of all of the complexities and all the things that are happening. And don't apologize for being a payments geek, because I think here today you're in very good company. And it's probably something we're all very proud of. And so this panel is, I'm going to let them introduce themselves, all experts, all passionate, but all having different views. And what we wanted to do this morning was to each panelist to pick two topics which they want to spotlight and give their personal insights, because this isn't about payments rhetoric. This is about personal insights, your personal contribution, and how we as individuals boost that dialogue and move it forward for the benefit of all. And as Steve articulated, there's so many things have changed, so many things are happening, and opportunity, the phenomenal activity across the UK and beyond in open banking, giving us embedded finance, the furtherance of digital wallets, more opportunity, more data. But we have some challenges too, which we all need to face. Interoperability, true interoperability at a technical and global scale. Collaboration is the essence of everything we do, and we all do that, but there are barriers to collaboration. It was fantastic to hear Steve talking about their relationship with lots of fintech organizations. It's hard to get very large organizations and very small organizations working together. Have you tried to sell in to a bank? You know, it's challenging, and it's not because people want to be difficult, it's because it's challenging. Procurement, material outsourcing, contracts that work for big but not for small, etc., etc. Fraud. Fraud is a massive problem for this industry and something we have to hone in on. And so many topics and so many companies outside to think about. So throughout today, I urge everyone here to think about your personal insights, the topics that really appeal to you, capturing your imagination and your ability to connect these ideas together, because it's only the people in this room and those digitally online that are going to move the industry forward. At which point I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. Jana.
Good morning, everyone. Absolute pleasure to be here in front of such a fantastic-looking audience. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak. Everything you said, Marion, absolutely so close to my heart, so I'm looking forward to the conversation. I am Jana Mackintosh. I'm the Managing Director at UK Finance for all of our payments and innovation work, which covers a real big breadth of activities. So I'm going to try and pick the two that is closest to my heart. But
okay. Fantastic. Good morning, and yeah, fantastic to be here in person as well. Really good opportunity. So I'm Chris Hemsey. I'm the Managing Director of the Payment Systems Regulator, and as many of you will know, that means we regulate most of the payment systems that sit behind our daily lives, but then also the markets and the participants that use them to deliver services.
Good morning, I'm Andrew Hewitt. I work for FIS as Director of Payment and Data Solutions, involved with non-card payments, whether that's in the UK with CHAPS and faster payments or in the European market with SCT Instant. I'm very happy to be here at a conference with actual real people rather than sat behind a screen. It's very nice.
Morning, thank you. Mark Nalder from Nationwide. So until yesterday morning, I was going to be enjoying this panel session from behind there until I got asked to step in. So if anyone wants to see Paul today, apologies, I'm Paul. So I work for Nationwide. I've been involved in the industry for 25 plus years now, so I'm really looking forward to the discussion this morning.
Great, thank you so much. And so with no further ado, if each of the panelists just talk about their first topic, and as I say, please capture those thoughts yourselves and take them forward throughout today. Jana.
Fantastic. I'm so happy to start with the first one. And it's one, to be honest, that I believe at the moment is kind of the undercurrent of so many of the things that we do. We've been so focused over the last 5 years at really championing competition, opening up access. We heard kind of Steve talk about that as well. Really kind of thinking about the ecosystem. How do we kind of promote what it is that we do within the UK and internationally? But as we kind of looked into the future and a lot of the work that we're doing on innovation, which kind of feels like it's so far out, it's still undefined, there's no structure necessarily around it. the guiding principle that we keep coming back to, which is so important, I think, is the fact that we need to start developing products and services and solutions within payments that's really and truly customer-centric. I think if we start thinking about doing work, if we think about investing in products and solutions that customers really want to use, that will really make a difference in their daily lives, that they really need during what is, as we know, really difficult circumstances, not only will that support the ecosystem, it will make the investment that we put into all these big pieces of infrastructure, which we will talk about today as well, it makes it worthwhile because we'll have adoption, we'll have usage, we can evolve the way that we engage with customers. And if we have that kind of customer-centric view in the way that we innovate, in the way that we solve for big problems like fraud, the whole kind of ecosystem will thrive. And if the ecosystem thrives, then we all work together in a much more cohesive, collaborative, constructive way. So that, for me, in terms of all the kind of big themes and drivers that we see in the industry, whether that is the environmental drivers, whether that's the technology drivers, whether it's the regulatory drivers that we see, I think we do need to keep coming back to that theme for me, which is why are we doing this and what will the customers get? How do we make this really customer-centric?
Great, thanks, Jana. And Chris, following on from that.
Yeah, a bit of a build, I guess, actually. I think I'd really like to pull out the importance of choice and the link to competition, actually, and healthy competition. And Steve was making a point in the earlier session, actually, which really makes this point about why does that matter? Well, payments are so integral to our economy and to our society that if people don't have that choice to make a payment, receive a payment in a way that actually works for them, very much as you were saying, Jana, that is a really significant problem. And so that highlights a lot of the work that I know industry and the PSR has been working on, both in maintaining cash as a payment option, also checks, I guess. But then picking up that point around that transition and the innovation is the work to really identify what we can do to make these technologies work, realise those opportunities, and as you say, Jana, make sure that they actually solve real-world problems. And I think the thing that I would then, how do we deliver that choice? Well, two things, really. I think one is that we need good, healthy competition in markets. And in many payment markets, we have that. We have that in spades. Firms like Zettle, Square entering into markets to allow sole traders to take digital payments. These are significant steps forward. But there are areas in the market where there is quite a lot of concentration and where we see that there are risks. And this comes to the second point, and I think I'm about to agree with you, Jana, that there are some opportunities that we need to seize. So one is that we need account-to-account payments, interbank payments, faster payments, to work for a larger set of uses. But it needs to work in a way that's safe and that actually works for people and businesses. And then the final thing is, the second opportunity is realising the opportunity of open banking. We need to move it from being a competition remedy to being a business-as-usual part of the payment ecosystem, properly regulated, solving real-world problems, and adapting to solve the future challenges.
Thanks, Chris. Andrew.
Yep. For me, it's about, I have this change to make because of some regulation or some market change. Do I see that as compliance, something I have to do, or do I see that as an opportunity to make the most of what the change is? And I feel like participant organisations who can take the view that actually this isn't just something I have to do, this is something I can get something from, will get the most from these kind of changes and create things for consumers that they actually want. So if we take an example, there are lots of examples, but we'll take one that's kind of front of mind at the moment for many people in this room with the MPA. Do you see it as just an ISO 20022 migration? I have to connect to this new thing. I have to respond to some documentation that's out in the market, and I need to do it in a certain time frame. Do you see it as that and tick the box and move along? Or do you see it as, hang on a minute, I've got some great new data here. I've got legal entity identifiers, an end-to-end transaction reference, purpose codes within payments. Hang on a minute, I can do loads of cool stuff with that. I can do great analytics on what my customers are doing. I can enrich my AML and my fraud engine with the additional data. I can track from end to end. those are only things I've thought of. There's probably 100 other things, right? Cleverer people than me will come up with a better answer. But look, take the opportunity of the change and don't just see it as, I've got to do this change. Take it as, wow, okay, what can I do with this? What benefit can I get from this? What can I do for my consumers?
Thanks, Andrew. And moving on.
Yeah, I kind of looked at it from a customer point of view. Payments is now, it's more than just a payment, it's an experience. And actually, the world's changed. So things like, social media has really changed the way people want instant response. And I think, how do we cope? How does payments cope with, the change of how customers just, their demands and behaviours now are so different. If they tap and go, that the contact has just changed the way people expect payments to work. So even though we've still got, Steve touched on it, cash, checks, and other things, overnight backed payments, if it's not there instantly, they go on social media. So how can payments innovate quickly to meet those kind of changing kind of customer demands and behaviours? Because the world's changing. And I think, we have got historical payments that aren't instant, and I think we need to be able to respond to that to ensure that customers do get what they want, and that's kind of
Thanks, Mark. So I think the theme that was coming up for me across that first point was customer centricity. And there's an interesting point that's sort of triggered in my mind about a month ago, and it was triggered in Canada where truckers were resisting some various changes, and the government decided to stop payments to them, which is pretty scary in terms of the importance of payments. And what came out of that dialogue was that perhaps the right to transact is a human right. And I think there's about 30 that United Nations define. And should not the 31st be the right to transact, whether it's cash, whether it's check, whether it's digital? But you have to enable individuals, businesses, organizations, countries to transact. So I think that's quite an interesting and powerful concept of the importance of payments and pulling out that need for all of the different segments to be able to participate in the payments ecosystem. And then that point about competition. We have it, which is fantastic, and the UK has really moved forward, but there are barriers and challenges, and do we move fast enough? And does our governance get in the way? And do other barriers get in the way? And therefore, it's the things that get in the way that we need to focus on. And what came through for me listening to you, Andrew, was that sort of whole, I won't use the word business case because it's a bit sort of, it's a bit stale. There isn't really a business case in lots of these scenarios. But the why we're doing it, to your point, Jana, and then what we can all benefit from in terms of, payments with purpose, doing the right thing, enabling the workforce, enabling human beings, enabling the economy and sustainability of our ecosystem. So all of those points came through. So we'll capture those and move around to the second points that you all want to raise. Jana.
Well, that is... I have one that hopefully kind of neatly ties into what you just said.
We didn't rehearse this.
We did not rehearse this at all, no. And that is that payments has become so strategic. It never used to be for those who have been in this industry, and many of you would have been, engaging in the activities that we are for so many years. It has never been as important as a tool in many different ways, whether that is in a crisis, like what we are going through now, and the way that payments facilitate, enable, support various policy decisions, very tough policy decisions, but it comes back to payments, to your point around kind of it being the lifeline. It is that lifeline for many countries, for many individuals. But it's also a very strong commercial driver, and it is because we put so much emphasis on competition. We're so focused on innovation. You can't help but come back to the fact that all of a sudden, payments is in the boardroom. Payments is this really important kind of like strategic item that people want to talk about, that people are thinking about commercializing in ways that we've never thought about before. And I think all these conversations are incredibly encouraging, which means we now operate in an ecosystem, in an industry that never had these incentives and characteristics. And we now need to kind of figure out how do we do this, which is my second point, which comes on to the how, if we can figure out the what, which, and I know you're equally passionate about this, Marion, is the point around collaboration. How do we do this together? Because the problem with payments is that it is a network. We very often find it incredibly difficult to move on these items ourselves, and in particular if it's really big strategic items, like fraud or like the MPA, we do need to find a way to collaborate, and we need to find a way to collaborate with the regulators as well. And in the spirit of collaboration as well, an absolute kind of like plug for the conference as well, but we collaborated with the Payment Association at UK Finance to do a piece of work around the future of payments regulation. And that was because, well, one, we think we can bring all these communities together in a way to kind of provide some of these insights, but two, that payments regulation, in terms of a partner, in terms of an enabler, will be a constant in our industry. We need to work with the regulators and understanding how we navigate some of this. And we see really good examples emerging as well, a mini spotlight on CBDCs and the work that we're doing with the Bank of England to kind of demonstrate that collaboration as well. The way that the Bank of England is thinking about this innovation is through a public-private partnership. It's saying we can't do this individually. We have to kind of figure out how to do it together. And I think all these kind of different pieces for me, kind of making sure that we keep that kind of, absolutely fantastic focus that payments now has, that we do something meaningful with it, but that we find this kind of way to collaborate with the industry, with each other, and with the regulators to kind of deliver on that kind of ambition, for me is kind of the very next kind of like how.
Okay, so the how, working with collaborators. Chris?
Yeah, so I'd like to pick out the importance of protecting people and why that's important. And it actually goes to one of these knotty problems that is certainly because we have a network, we have got lots of different payment firms,
yeah.
and the solution does lie in collaboration and joining up exactly the kind of innovation with the regulatory framework, and that is fraud. So I think the first thing to say is that we've made huge strides forward actually on fraud. So we were hearing just in the previous session around SCA, that's a big step forward. But then the issues around authorised push payment fraud within the interbank systems, lots and lots of work to do. But we shouldn't forget that lots of progress as well. So the rollout of confirmation of payee, touching well over 90% of transactions, relevant transactions now, is a really significant step forward that makes it harder for fraudsters. The other one is that I'd pull out in terms of progress is that the voluntary reimbursement mechanism, the CRM code, for the first time, victims that through no fault of their own lose sometimes life-changing sums of money now benefit from the protections offered by this code. And the banks, building societies that are standing behind that voluntary commitment. And that's a really good step forward, really important thing that makes a huge difference to literally tens of thousands of people's lives. But of course, we need to do more. We need to do more because, well, for one thing, this fraud is increasing, and we also need to move from a focus on protecting victims to reducing the numbers in the first place. So actually designing this fraud out of the system. Now, with that, I think, comes a need to start to make some quite structural changes in the industry to really make sure that industry regulation and those systems at the centre can actually change, adapt, and meet the challenge that fraudsters are always going to present in terms of payments. And so what does that mean? Well, I think that the governance of our systems needs to change. It needs to become much more flexible, much more, the rules need to be able to adapt and change so that we can design out these sorts of problems much, much quicker than we've managed. And that does have implications for how organisations like Pay.UK, how they govern the systems, how they operate themselves, and then also as we move into the growth of open banking, for example, again, we need rules that will be able to change. We need governance that is responsive and essentially consumer-centric to make sure we address these problems. I guess a final thought there is, two final thoughts. One is, well, what's the benefit of that? Well, I think the commercial benefit of that is that if you have that trust, which Steve talked about, I think you were talking about that trust in these systems, it means that people will be much more comfortable, much more confident using alternative ways of paying, which I think is in the interest of the whole ecosystem, going back to that choice competition theme. And then a final thing, which is a really knotty problem, I think, is how do we get from today's system where if I pay a small amount of money to a friend, if I'm buying something using my bank account, or if I'm transferring tens of thousands of pounds to put a deposit down on a house, it actually looks and feels quite similar. The consumer experience today feels very similar when you're doing things that are actually quite different from a payments perspective in terms of the risks, the issues, and how we might manage and protect people. So I think the future there, when we're trying to design out fraud, is to be increasingly differentiate between these different types of payments, to try and explain to consumers that if you're transferring a small amount of money, it's like cash, that is a bit like cash. If you're buying something, it needs to look and feel a bit more like a traditional purchase. And then if you're transferring life-changing sums of money, perhaps you shouldn't expect that to be absolutely instant. And maybe it's okay if it's 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and a few extra checks take place. So that greater differentiation, I think, is where we need to head in terms of designing out fraud out of our systems.
Thanks, Chris. Andrew.
Yeah, building on something, Chris, you were saying just earlier on around competition between payment systems. So we've got a card network that operates quite well, and we're hoping to get a faster payment network that can compete with that. Maybe actually with open banking, we already have some of that, right? We're now seeing kind of nearly 4 million payments a month in January made by open banking, but I'd like to see a lot more growth in that. And one thing that we have at the moment in the market is this idea of variable recurring payments, something which some of you might be aware of. Just coming out, the ability for me to move money from one of my accounts to one of my other accounts at a different provider, and not have to go through secure customer authentication every single time. That's great, and it's quite interesting. I feel like it might be a missed opportunity though to kind of expand out and say, hang on a minute, we've got this mechanism, we've got the hood up in the bank to change how I'm operating, how I'm allowing permissions to come in and out through this API. Wouldn't it be great if I could extend that out now? The CMA last week clarified what it meant, what a sweeping use case was, and more definition, and said quite unequivocally, this is not for e-commerce, it's not for that kind of thing, which, it's a bit of a shame, but, hopefully that will get expanded out. But I think it raises some interesting questions of then what is my account? So if I have an account at a buy now, pay later provider, for example, which is technically a loan, can I sweep into that from my other account, and can that then be made to make payment 20 minutes later? Is that a loan? Is it not? So it's starting to get right around the edges of, and by the way, the fintechs in this room will be innovating around whatever the rules are. They'll find the holes in the rules, and they'll do something cool with it. But why not just embrace it and say, look, we've got this great infrastructure that could actually compete with the card infrastructure if it's allowed to, and if we can make these small changes. So I think VRP is super interesting for me, but I'd very much like to see the use cases expanded slightly.
Okay, and lastly, Mark.
It's following from what Chris touched on, I guess, customer choice. And I guess for me, for a non-payments person in this room today, we talked about MPA, APIs, COP, SCA. For someone who's not in the payments market, that's quite scary. And Steve touched on it in the opening remarks around, there's not the demand for cash and check that there was 5, 10, 15 years ago, and it will decline over time. But there still is a real rump of customers in the UK and that need cash, and I think and need to want to use check, and we're not going to transition those customers to completely remove that. So I think we've got to be really aware of that, and as we continue to innovate, make sure we don't leave those customers behind. We talk a lot about access to cash, but actually acceptance of cash is equally a bigger problem now. You go into a shop now and you can't buy things, you can't pay for things with cash anymore. So people that are vulnerable, you're creating even more vulnerability. So as we continue to innovate, we need to remember and reflect that actually people still want to use them, maybe not as fashionable payment types anymore, but it's equally important to those customers that.
Thanks, Marion. That's probably a nice note to end on, but there were some key themes coming through there, so I'll just wave through, and if I miss anything, please shout. Regulation. Regulation is our friend. It's the kite mark, as I see it. It's the approval pop of our industry. This is financial transactions. Fraud is epidemic. It's not acceptable. We shouldn't be accepting this, and therefore there's more that we need to do. And regulatory frameworks enable us to do that. But, having been in the industry myself 20 years and a number of different guys, it's not waiting until the regulator says thou shalt. we all should do this, but take that opportunity and take that framework to do it in a safe, secure environment to build that trust. And I think what you were also touching on, Chris, was differentiation and education, perhaps, making it clear, well, you can't, transact 1 million in 5 seconds because it's not safe to do so. And it sounds a bit sort of patronizing, but it isn't. It's about truly understanding for our customers, safety comes first, transaction certainty comes second, but managing that differentiation, but at the same time embracing, contactless and real-time payments in a creative way. So that framework, and I think those frameworks expand beyond our shores, and seeing what other countries are doing is part of that essence as well. And then moving through in terms of variable recurring payments, and I was looking at Klarna and all the acquisitions Klarna have just made. Is that the death of the credit card? Possibly, because often buy now, pay later is free. Credit cards aren't. So you're seeing real shifts and real changes. Variable recurring payments, and a lot of us are wedded to direct debits because that's how I started my life in payments. But they'll start to be compromised in terms of volumes because choice, control is in the hands of the consumer, as is their identity, as are all of these things. So I see that shifting, a market that was created in the 60s, So we're talking 60 years on, we're seeing major shifts and change. And I loved your last point, Mark, which is about don't leave anyone behind. Financial inclusion, digital inclusion, payments industry has a huge role to play in this. And it's leaving people behind, not just because they don't have a bank account, but maybe they don't have the capacity to use digital tools. And therefore, we have a duty, again, in a constructive and buoyant way, to have payments with purpose and make sure that we factor inclusion and sustainability into everything we do. Yeah? So I think we're opening up for questions. I'm sure we're running over, as we always do when we start, because we have the luxury of time. But are there questions from the audience?
No, not from me. I'm just acting as the intermediary for some of our online questions that are coming in. We've got one for Chris here. You said open banking needs correct regulatory oversight. Given the PSR does not regulate AIS and PIS, what role does the PSR play?
Very good question. So I think I distinguish between individual payment firms where the FCA is the regulator and, in my view, should continue to regulate firms at that firm level. But I see open banking as a system. It is a system of rules that have the characteristics that create the sorts of problems that we sometimes see in our other payment systems. That need for coordination, the need for central protection and rules. And for those reasons, it's that payments aspect of open banking that I think needs that proper regulatory oversight. And it is no more than thinking about the analogy of what we have today for our interbank systems. It's not, so when I talk about the need for proper regulation of open banking, it is to apply the principles that we've established and that I think are delivering real benefits in our current payment systems to this new payment system of open banking. So it's not to shift the boundary of who regulates what, just apply it to that new context.
Are there other questions online? No? Any questions from the audience? Just raise your hands. Great, we'll have Mr. Craddock.
A great spotlight on the themes, and thank you very much. There's something that is being adopted in other parts of the world, which I'm not hearing talked about very much, and that's request to pay. And I'm also very mindful of the fact that we have the inaugural Digital Currencies 360 event next door, and the theme of digital currencies as being something that our industry is spotlighting on seems not to be prominent in the dialogue. And I'm either I've missed something or it really isn't important. What's the views on those two strands of innovation? Request to pay, which seems to be a capability that has great potential, and digital currencies, which has enormous amount of change.
So request to pay in digital currencies, and I don't think it's not on people's minds, but there's a lot of topics here. And some are here and some are coming. So who would like to field digital currencies?
Not digital. I was going to say request to pay.
Request to pay. We'll start with that one. Go on, Andy.
So yeah, for request to pay, personal view, the way in which request to pay in the UK market has been set up kind of hamstrings it very slightly. So there are certain constructs within it which require, for example, the option to give part payments for every payment. Well, that's great for the use case that it was set up for. So it came out of regulation. It came out of we want to give an alternative for direct debits to people who are disadvantaged. So we need to be able to offer part payment. But what that does then is it means that it's not really very useful for other use cases. It's potentially very good for utility companies and making those kind of payments. But if I'm standing in the queue in Tesco and I want to use an overlay service to make a payment, I need to pay for all of my groceries, not 98% of them or half of them, or pay for it in a week, right? So I feel like there are a couple of small things which have made it quite difficult. It'd be interesting to see how SEPA request to pay does in comparison, because it's not hamstrung with some of those design challenges.
Yeah, I guess I'd agree with that. I think for me, I don't think they found the killer use case yet. With contactless, TFL was the catalyst. I'm not sure yet they found that request to pay. I think request to pay is great. It's a real opportunity, but I don't think they found that killer use case. If they do, I think it will start to land, and it will start to challenge Tony and things like direct debits and stuff. But until then, I think it's going to be quite a niche market still.
So there's an opportunity, a killer use case for request to pay, and it will take off. And I agree. I think it will change and revolutionise sort of invoicing and how customers and suppliers actually interact, but not quite there yet. Should we move to digital currencies?
I'm happy to take digital currencies.
Go for it.
Did a mini spotlight, Tony, on central bank digital currencies, but you're absolutely right. It deserves an absolutely massive spotlight, and I'm really pleased that there's another conference kind of happening on this as well, because we talk about it like it's not yet happened. But it has happened. It is already a really big part of financial services and beyond financial services, to be honest. And I think the difficulty with it is that there are so many facets to it. We talk about technology, we talk about the regulation, we talk about kind of the role of central banks, we talk about the consumer protection kind of like pieces around there. And because it is so complex, we need to kind of find a way to start the conversation in a meaningful way. The central banks have taken obviously a massive leadership role and helping navigate that with the programs that we see across the globe on central bank digital currencies. But the industry and kind of the solutions that exist in terms of digital currencies and stable coins, in my view, is going to be there. And we do need to do more of that, Tony. We need to do more engagement with that sector, with the solutions, to understand how does that it interacts with the existing programs that we're running, because we think the future is very far away, but we need to start designing it today. I always kind of say when it comes to the innovation agenda, by the time you see it, you're too late. You should have engaged with this a very long time ago. And I think we're on the cusp of that with CBDCs and with digital currencies. We're already seeing it. Are we too late? We do need to kind of pile in more. And kind of help shape that ecosystem and make it part of the conversation that we are having.
So a growing agenda as we move forward, Jana. Yeah. Okay. Any questions from the audience? I think we've got 29 seconds left. This gentleman here.
Hiya. Great talk. I mean, given the title on the spotlight for UK payments landscape, you talked about overlay services and how can different networks compete against card networks? Like, it'll be good to understand how, for instance, in the UK, we're learning from other countries like India, where actually national networks can go toe-to-toe against card networks, and you can see, 40, 50% adoption in less than 3 years, right, with the likes of RuPay. What's the UK doing to learn from what's happening in other countries at scale and potentially apply it here locally?
Yeah, and that sort of plays into your point, Chris, I think, about getting interbank real-time payments more widely adopted as an alternative to card rails. Views?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a really important mindset, which I certainly share, which is that there is always things to learn from talking to people outside of the UK, talking internationally, because, as you rightly say, if you can learn things from various places where the context is slightly different, but actually there's some really interesting things around, why did it work there and not here. I think the UK is in a, when you do make some of those comparisons, the UK is in a slightly different place, because if you look at many other countries, there are sort of there's a third option, isn't there, in many other jurisdictions, and we haven't really got that in the UK today. But coming back to your point, yes, we do. So we need to, learn from others. We do talk to a range of different kind of peer organisations. And there's a big focus actually in payments around that international connectivity, because the days where the UK can just sort of say we're at the leading edge on everything, well, we're clearly not. There's more to learn from everywhere. So it's a really good point.
Any other comments on that one?
Yeah, I mean,
Andrew?
you could talk for half an hour or longer about that, right? There are for me, there's lots of little bits of the puzzle that need to fall into place in order for the interbank system to be able to compete with the cards. We've touched on loads of them, but there are things like brand, there are things like consumer protection, variable consumer protection within that, the idea of transaction finality, which hopefully we're going to get with this instant payment under MPA, and then just the fact that we've trained users really well to use cards, right? They really understand how to use them in every use case. COVID couldn't have done more for adoption of contactless, right? I'm sure the card schemes are very happy with that, because they couldn't have marketed to get that kind of adoption. So you've got this big incumbency advantage over here as well. So literally could talk about half an hour on that subject, but for me it's lots of little bits, right, that need to fall into place. And by the way, some of them are here or are coming very soon. So
Thank you for that. And I think we're out of time now, so lots of elements to make this happen. And every country is different, but we should learn from each other. And it is about adoption, and it is about comfort as well. So I'd like to thank each of the audience. Perhaps a round of applause for our speakers.